Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football, a massive Big Ten matchup as Wisconsin heads on the road to play a Purdue team that, although 1-2, you kind of watch the film back on this Purdue team. It's still a quality team, and I think they win that game a lot more times than not if they don't turn the ball over against Syracuse last week. And two teams that, if you listened kind of in the offseason, both real contenders in the Big Ten West, opening up Big Ten play. Massive game for both of these new head coaches to kind of kickstart conference play. Excited to get into this one because a couple different matchups I want to kind of dive into. Now, before we do, just want to say thank you to you guys. The support you guys have shown for all these game breakdowns truly has been phenomenal. Can't thank you guys enough for all the support. So one, if you do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. But more importantly, the best part about doing this is talking ball with you guys in the comment section, learning from you guys. So drop your predictions there. We'll chop it up. And without further ado, let's get into this matchup. And I want to start with the Wisconsin offense. It's kind of been the storyline of the offseason where you bring in Luke Fickell, he brings in Phil Longo, Tanner Mordecai coming in from SMU, and they're going to go and kind of spread it out a little bit more, throw the football. This offense is going to look a lot different from what you saw under Paul Chryst. And you've seen some growing pains. And I think a lot of Wisconsin fans would agree with that. And also, like, it's probably to be expected, right? This is a drastic different identity on this Wisconsin offense. And it was kind of foolish for us to just expect them to hit the ground running in terms of running this offense. Now, Tanner Mordecai has been solid. 67% completion, 2 touchdowns to 2 interceptions. What I find the biggest problem is I don't think the pass protection has been that great. And we thought guys like Jack Nelson would kind of take that step and be one of the better offensive linemen in the Big Ten. We haven't quite seen that yet. And that's not a knock on the personnel. I think that offensive line just needs to come together a little bit more. And again, this is an offensive line that's used to down blocking, running the football, and then having a lot more pass protection sets. And I think they're struggling a little bit. But if they can kind of get that going, Tanner Mordecai, when he's been clean in the pocket, has been a pretty efficient passer. Now, this Wisconsin offense, especially looking at their first 3 games, this is a team that there's a lot of realities where they're 3-0, right? You go on the road to Washington State, turn the ball over 3 times, you settle for a lot of field goals. They outgained Washington State on the road, and that is a top 25 team out there in the Pac-12. If they can just play a little bit of a cleaner brand of football, limit the negative plays, limit the turnovers, and making sure you're scoring touchdowns when you get into the red zone, I think this offense, the narrative around this offense probably is a lot different, right? And the last thing I want to note is, one, all the talk around the transfer wide receivers, don't forget about Shamir DK. I think he's probably the best wide receiver on this Wisconsin team. And then sometimes you just don't overcomplicate things. And you look at your offense and say, who are our playmakers? Who are our best players to go to kind of move the football? It's in the running back room. I mean, Braylon Allen, Ches Malusi, both averaging over 6.7 yards per carry. They still got one of the best running back rooms in the country. And I'd like to see them go to that a little bit more to open up the passing game, right? In terms of, hey, our identity, we want to be able to throw the ball. That's why you bring in Phil Longo. That's why you bring in Tanner Mordecai. Want to know what makes it a lot easier to throw the football is establishing a run game, kind of sucking up those linebackers, sucking up those safeties, and then working that RPO, working that play action after you establish that run game. I think that would help Tanner Mordecai a little bit. I think it'd slow down the pass rush a little bit. I'd like to see that a little bit more from this Wisconsin team. You look at Purdue, I think the secondary, you're seeing that improvement in Ryan Walters. He is a specialist in kind of developing secondaries, did a phenomenal job at Illinois. They got carved up against Fresno State, and to a concerning extent. I think it's gotten a little bit better. And I think for Purdue, you got to be a little bit more patient. Let Ryan Walters get his guys on the defensive side of the ball, get his scheme that he wants to implement. Ryan Walters, I trust to get this defense right. It might just take a little bit longer. And you see Brent Venables had some growing pains, a defensive-minded head coach at Oklahoma. Dan Lanning out in Oregon had some growing pains with that defense. First-year defensive-minded head coaches, you sometimes see a little bit of a slow start for the defense because the personnel is very important to how you run a defense. Now, O.C. Brothers, Nick Scruton, I think those guys can play. And I think the biggest matchup here is, can Wisconsin get that run game going against a Purdue front seven that I think is pretty good? And if you can kind of win up front and stop that run game, it'll take a little bit pressure off that secondary that has been a little leaky at times for Purdue. Now, flipping the side, Purdue also bringing in a transfer quarterback, a little bit of a new offensive scheme. And again, you're seeing the growing pains, just like we mentioned, Wisconsin. I think Hudson Card's been solid, 65% completion percentage, 3 touchdowns. My concern with Purdue on the offensive side of the ball is they want to run the football a little bit more. They're banged up front. They don't really have that personnel to kind of grind you down because Jeff Brom had a lot more kind of an air raid system there. And so you're seeing a little bit of a conflicting identities where I think a lot of the personnel was that Jeff Brom personnel, but they want to run that football and they haven't really been able to get that run game going. Again, averaging just under 3 yards per carry. Devin Mockabee, I think one of the more talented running backs in the Big Ten, hasn't really been able to find his stride yet. If Purdue can get that run game going, take a little pressure off of Hudson Card, I think that would make a lot of sense. And you look at Wisconsin forcing 2 turnovers per game. This is not as an elite defense as we've seen under Paul Chryst and Jim Leonard, but that's expected from a number standpoint. When you're running more plays, when you're running a little bit more up tempo, it's going to put a little bit more stress on this Wisconsin defense. They still got some guys. I think they got some of the best linebacker play you see in the Big Ten, a solid secondary. What I think they might be missing is kind of that elite pass rusher, right? You had Keanu Benton, Nick Herbig last year where, I mean, they could just get pressure with 4 guys. You don't really have that elite pass rusher this year. But from an overall standpoint, I don't think this Wisconsin defense is as bad as the national media would probably think just looking at the numbers because, again, they're opposite an offense that's running a little bit more pace and kind of forcing the defense to be out on the field a little bit more. Getting into the pick, Wisconsin heading on the road, 5.5-point favorites, which is interesting. Purdue has not been good on the road, right? Losing to Fresno State and Syracuse. They're 0-2 at home. I'm leaning Wisconsin. I think you've seen a little bit more of an identity emerge from Wisconsin than Purdue. Again, I'm looking at this Purdue team, especially on the offensive side of the ball, and I don't think they have the playmakers in that wide receiver room, and I don't know if they have the guys up front to establish that run game. So you look at that Purdue offense, and I would love to hear the input of the Purdue fans. But when I watch them against Syracuse, when I watch them against Fresno State, especially like in those short yardage situations where you want to be able to pick up that yard, like they haven't been able to move bodies and establish that run. And I don't know if they have the elite pass catchers. They got some solid guys, but I don't know if they're elite in that wide receiver room to really test a Wisconsin secondary that I think is pretty damn good. And on the flip side, I think the second half of that Georgia Southern game, and I'm not reading too much into a Georgia Southern defense that's not good, you're starting to see a little bit more rhythm. But at the end of the day, they still have some playmakers on that offensive side of the ball. 2 really good running backs. Tanner Mordecai, still a very, very good quarterback, still adjusting to that offensive scheme. I think there's just a little bit more to trust with this Wisconsin team than with this Purdue team, but 2 teams that, again, I think are better than what their records say, and it's going to be a really good matchup. Again, want to hear from you guys in the comment section. I'm riding with the Wisconsin covering the 5.5 points here. I think they're just a little bit more to trust than what you've seen from Purdue. But again, would love to hear what you guys think. Appreciate you guys rocking with the boys as usual. And if you do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel, and we'll talk to y'all later.